Hey guys, Darren Kelly, coach of Richmond Pods, and welcome back to another episode reviewing these community series games. This is part two, and I'm going to be spending a bit of time talking about the next three games which have happened over the last couple days, particularly Melbourne, Richmond, Western Bulldogs, Hawthorn, and St Kilda and Essendon. Some of these teams are very, really relevant to AFL Fantasy, and this is one of the last looks that we're going to get before round one. So let's get straight into it.
All the pain.
So, like I said, we're going to be going through these next three games, and I think we're just going to jump straight in. I don't want to take too much time in this video, but like I said, there are some really important games that we need to look at. None more important than the first one that we're going to look at here in Melbourne and Richmond. As I said, this is the last look that we're going to get for both of these teams prior to round one. So everything that we saw from this game is all we're going to get for the remainder of the preseason. So we're pretty much just going to have to make our decisions based off what we've seen so far in the preseason and this game. So it was super unfortunate that this game got abandoned because I really wanted to see a full game of what these guys are going to do, because there are a host of so many players that we're talking about in this matchup, particularly more on the Melbourne side than Richmond. But I think we can take enough out of this game from the first half, particularly. That's where most of the important stuff happens. So I have been able to get a pretty decent amount of results and interpretation out of a lot of this game. So I do have a pretty extensive list of what I want to talk about here. So hopefully it's not going to be too long, but yeah, let's get into it. So one thing that I wanted to also mention before we get into the individual players is the time on ground TOG stat is kind of bugged in this game. You know, looking at a lot of these stats, you're seeing like 90% for some players, 85%, as low as 38%. That's due to the lightning delay. The way that it sort of works is that when they went off, no one's really ticking over the bench, and no one's putting a stop to the actual stop clocks on how much time they're actually playing on ground. So it's hard to take a lot into account when it comes to their time on ground in this game, because that has just been completely wiped, given they had a 30-minute delay in the first quarter, and then again had a little bit of delay in the third quarter before the game was abandoned due to lightning, like I said. So I wouldn't read too much into the time on ground stat at all, and that does obviously affect points per minute stat, which is I know a lot of the community uses for a lot of their research. So please be mindful of that when you're looking at it. You know, looking at Trent Rivers, for example, had the 17 disposals and scored a 56 off 38% of time on ground. That's just not realistic. I went back and watched it a second time around, and he was on the ground for probably 70 or 80% of the time for the actual game that was played. So really take that into account, that he was on the field. He just started on the bench for that first quarter, and that's when obviously the delay happened, so his time on ground wasn't getting ticked over like a lot of these other players that were on the field to start off with. So please just keep that in mind. But now let's get into the individual teams and players, starting with Melbourne. Obviously, I really wanted to talk about their game style as such. So they're a bit of a trap for me in the sense that they played two of the easiest sides so far this preseason. You know, they played North last week, and now they played Richmond. So two very, very easy sides to allow points and a lot of space. So, and these games are typically very highly scored anyway, but I think that's only added to that effect as well. So what are Melbourne really trying to do when it comes to their ball movement? I think they're trying to move the ball really, really quickly, and that's pretty obvious. You know, that you could see that in the way that they were going about it. They were moving the ball quickly through the guts, and even throughout the wings and stuff like that. So what does that mean for fantasy? I don't think it's very fantasy friendly, in my opinion. You know, think of the other teams that do that, like Hawthorn, I think is a very similar sort of game style. They really drive off halfback. They really don't have anyone that averages significant numbers. Really, I think the only one that averaged over 90 was Lloyd Meek, the ruckman. Everyone else is sort of 90 and below. Even some of the best players, you know, like a name on an MP and Newcomb, and like the main guys that you sort of think of when you think of Hawthorn. There's no one really there. So is Melbourne sort of moving towards that sort of game style, and does that mean they're going to struggle to have these big high scorers? Potentially, it's no yes or no answer, but it's something definitely that we need to flag if we're going to move forward with picking a lot of these players, because yeah, it may reduce what their ceiling's going to be when it comes to when we're going to select them. You know, we want them to go that really next level, like a Jack Steele, for example, priced at that 96. Is it really realistic that he can go that 100, 105 that we really want him to go as a starting selection? If this is the way the ball movement's going to go, I'm not quite sure. But however, I do really think this game style does help a few players, particularly that are looking for a bit of a breakout. And that really leads me into the next player that I want to talk about, and that is Caleb Windsor. He was the one that got the most hype out of this game. He looked phenomenal in the first quarter, where he had 10 disposals, 2 marks, 1 tackle, and a goal. He was absolutely everywhere, and it was really clear that Melbourne wanted to get the ball in his hands as much as possible, because it really looks like he has a license to be that the ball user that really delivers inside 50 and hits that player on the chest. He just looked phenomenal in that. So that was really good confidence that, yeah, they want the ball in his hands, so they're giving it to him at every opportunity, and he also spreads quite well, so he was able to get a few marks and stuff like that around the ground. But what was really pleasing, based off the showing that he showed last week in the match simulation, was he actually has some scoring potential, right? Like we saw last week, he was really poor, barely touched it, didn't really get a huge score at all. It was actually quite nice to be able to see that he can actually rack up the ball and get some fantasy scores going alongside it. So that's a huge tick for him, and he's definitely in some big calculations. Obviously, the role was there. I don't think I need to touch on that too much, but he was clearly the most number one midfielder alongside the likes of Rivers, with Melbourne really rotating between sort of 6 players inside there, which I think is a bit of a trend happening in the AFL at the moment. Maybe it's just a preseason thing, but a lot of teams seem to be rotating a lot more players through the midfield, whereas, you know, previously it was like 3, 4 guys at most. Now it's sort of getting to like there's 2 main groups that sort of run through there and getting towards that 6-man midfield. So I don't know. I don't feel like that's going to trend well for a lot of these midfielders that we're looking at. With, yeah, no, obviously CBA usage being less in their average, and obviously not being around the ball as often, whether that's rotating on the bench more often to be rested more or being used in other spots. So that's definitely something that I want to keep an eye on going forward. And I'm interested to see if that sort of continues into opening round when it comes to the real stuff. But it is something that I have noticed a bit more than what I would have in previous years. Maybe it's been slowly migrating that way, but yeah, definitely feels like it's more impactful this preseason than ever. I think with a lot more quicker ball movement happening so far. So again, back to that midfield mix, it really was Windsor, Rivers as the clear number 1 and 2. Steele was there, Pickett was there, and then you had Farrow and I've got his name written here. I can't even fucking pronounce it. Langford. That's the one. Langford was down there as well. Not as many, but he was still within that sort of scope. So, they had probably 6 players in there, and again, I think that's really due to just that game style, requiring players to really burst from stoppages and move forward as quick as possible to get outside the back, and leading to them having some goals. So they need a quicker turnover, allowing people to rotate to half forward, wing, whatnot. So that probably doesn't mean too much. Doesn't really lead well for maybe a guy like Jack Steele, who we've really known to be that stoppage player. He's obviously thrived in that environment for a long time and has been a number 1 fantasy player for us before, but I don't know if it's really going to suit him when it comes to this really fast ball movement sort of game style, because he's not really blessed with speed. He's not the best kick by foot, so they're really not going to give it to him to be that main guy through there. So he's really just in there to do grunt work of get those tackles, maybe get a dish handball out here and there, and you know, he can spread and get some marks throughout the ground. But I just don't know if I see him going that massive 105 sort of average that we want him to get to be that sort of in contention to be a top 8 midfielder, to make him a really worthwhile pick. So I'm slowly fading away from this sort of pick at this point, because again, we really want him to be that 80 midfielder in there, and I think that's more trending towards maybe a 60% at this stage. Again, rotating a fair few guys through there, and they want the ball in different guys' hands rather than Jack Steele, whereas at St Kilda, he was sort of the main guy through there that they were happy to give it to. So, yeah, I'm sort of fading through this one, and it is a valid concern for me. So I think there's just way too many factors that are working against him at this stage. So I'm sort of, again, fading away from this pick. But just to finish off the Caleb Windsor chat, it's a good sign. It's obviously a huge tick in terms of the role, his scoring potential. So that's really good signs for him. And I think it's definitely in worthwhile consideration for our starting sides. And obviously a very good price point. I think 550 or something like that. So that's all really good signs. The other thing that was really impressive to me was the amount of goal assists and score involvements they had. Obviously, that comes along with the sort of role that I sort of explained, that he's that main ball user inside forward 50. So he's going to get a lot of those score involvements and goal assists. So yeah, it really doubled down on that they want him to use the ball. So again, really gives us some good signs. But he did slow down. Like if I show you the quarter by quarter sort of breakdown of what his scoring was, obviously quarter four just sort of knocked out 80 calculations. Even quarter three, they only played for like 5 or 6 minutes of that quarter, so you can't really take too much into consideration for that quarter at all. But yeah, obviously had that massive quarter one, then had a really quieter quarter two where he only had 2 CBAs in that second quarter, which is really disappointing out of 6 CBAs that happened throughout the course of that quarter. So is that due to rotation? Were they trying other things? Is this something that we're just going to see? There are concerns there for me that there may not be a consistent role there for him. He may be chopped and changed and float elsewhere. But I definitely see that there's going to be some upside to Windsor, and if this role can stick, I definitely see a 75 average push quite comfortably. It could definitely be higher, but again, I need to have a bit more confidence that his scoring is going to be consistent and not super patchy like we're sort of seeing so far in the preseason. So definitely one to keep on the list here. The next guy who was a lot quieter this week was Keziah Pickett. If I go back to the standard stats here, he only had the 14 touches, 1 mark, and 1 tackle. Didn't hit the scoreboard this week with a goal, so he was much quieter after a phenomenal showing last week. Looks to be getting set for a decrease in midfield minutes. He was well down to about 40% this week, so I think that's enough to say that he's not going to be that 60-70% midfielder that we saw him be last year. So I think that's enough to say we're just going to cross him off as a starting selection with his already pretty high price tag. So I think we could just kind of cross him off there, in my opinion. So next up is his cousin in Lorette Pickett, or however you want to pronounce his name. I'm terrible with names, but he was playing much more deep forward for most of the day and didn't really get involved as much, which is super unfortunate. Only had the 2 disposals with 2 marks and 2 tackles, which made him have a 26-point game. At his elevated price tag at 300k, I think I'm probably just going to go elsewhere and save that 70k to be able to use that 70k elsewhere, or maybe even just store it in the bank for what's going to happen come round 1 or post round 1 with some fix-ups and stuff like that. So I think we can sort of cross him off our list if I don't know if the scoring potential is going to be there for him. He was much quieter in this game than what we saw last week. I think I'm just going to save the coin. But the next one was Harvey Langford, as I said, is going to be there or thereabouts in terms of the midfield mix, but he didn't score particularly well. Had the 30% CBAs today, but I really struggle to see him have massive upside with what he's currently priced at, being that sort of 550, 600 straight midfielder. We'd realistically want him to need to go sort of 85 to be a worthwhile pick, which I just don't see at this point in time with the midfield mix he's got. Again, he'd probably want to see him more closer to 60%, where he can get more of that in and under work and be that bigger body and do some of the tackle work, which we saw a lot from Steele. Again, it wasn't a huge tackling sort of game, only the 30 tackles in obviously just over a half is not too bad, but definitely not amazing. And you can obviously see that most of that was done by Jack Steele, who had the 7 and had a pretty high market share of those tackles in the game. So that's maybe another big flag from a Jack Steele point of view, that he's obviously not going to get that big of a market share most of the time. You'd think it would be evenly spread throughout some of the guys. So I think I'm happy to cross Harvey Langford off my list of starting options. The final midfielder I think that needs a mention is the likes of Trent Rivers. I did talk about him a little bit at the start, but it would take a pretty ballsy coach to sort of go with him and select him as a starting option in fantasy. But if you just look at him as a pure what his role is, he has the best hybrid role in fantasy, which we rarely see these days. He's got a lot of midfield time, but a lot of halfback time, and he's able to float back and get those +6s. And again, has a license to demand the ball, use the ball well, and then deliver that forward 50, really drive them from halfback and even drive them forward into the forward 50 now as a bit more of that midfielder. But and what was really impressive was, again, the pure football aspect, not so much fantasy, but 3 goal assists, 8 score involvements, was the leading the way in the game for all those sort of stats. So really showed you how impressive he sort of was throughout this game, and the new sort of role that we're sort of going to expect from him. Again, really showed you that they want him delivering inside the forward 50 alongside Windsor. I feel like they play very similar roles, that they're both starting on the back of the centre bouncers and really driving forward. I don't think I saw both of them in there at the same time, so it could be a bit of a rotation between the two, making sure they're both fit to drive forward. So again, there are some concerns there, but for me, priced at 82 for a Trent Rivers is a very high price to pay. You realistically need him to push closer to that 100 to be a worthwhile pick, or even a great pick. 95 is still okay, because that still, again, puts him close to that sort of calculations for top 6, just outside. But again, it's not probably enough to be a smash pick in my opinion, and there are obviously lots of risks there that can work against him. And again, he doesn't have the greatest scoring history when he's had this role, when we've seen it in patches throughout the years. But again, this things could have changed over the preseason. Things change all the time. New coaching, new game style, all these things I do think could work well for him, and obviously benefit his overall average. But again, the other thing is these sort of games do typically lean towards these types of players that do score quite well. So there's just a few contrasting things there that work against him, but also work for him. So I'm not really sure I feel enough confidence to really pick a Trent Rivers as good as he was. I don't think I'll be going there as a starting selection just yet, based off what I saw in this match. But moving into the backline for Melbourne, I know it's a lot of Melbourne chat here, but there is just so many fantasy relevant players here that we need to talk about. But Salem is the next one. I think I'm happy to cross him off as a starting selection at his price point. I really thought he could become a premium defender for us, really taking a lot of that bulk load back there with maybe more kick-ins, with May sort of moving away from the club at this point in time. But with an interrupted preseason, really showed me nothing in this game that made me need to pick him. I really wanted him to grab me and just be like, you need to pick me. I really didn't see any of that, unfortunately. So there's potentially even a drop in his average, with a couple others looking like they're going to be the main distributors back there, which we'll get into now. The first being Lindsay. Now, for me, I feel like I have the most upside in Lindsay at this stage, and I have a lot of high hopes that he can really take his game to this next level, because he looks like he's going to take that main distributor off halfback. For Melbourne, he was starting at centre halfback and really pushing into the back of stoppages from the centre bouncers, so he's getting a few extra touches off the back of stoppage in there. But the other really exciting thing, which is what I've been crying for all preseason, and what I was really disappointed when I saw the match simulation, was the kick-ins. He took 5 kick-ins of the 7 of this match, 4 technically if you look at the stats, but he was in the process of taking a 5th before the match was delayed due to lightning, and then eventually called off, abandoned from the Lightning again. So he did technically he was going to take 5 of the 7 that we saw in a half a footy. So he looks like he's going to take a main kick-in role back there for Melbourne, which is only going to increase his numbers up as well. And then again, he's driving them from halfback, getting involved in linkage chains and switches and whatnot. So that's a really positive sign. Had the 14 touches for today, which is a really positive sign. 14 touches in a half is pretty impressive. If we look at his distribution of score throughout the day, it was really consistent, 18, 20, and then was on some decent track for a decent score in the third as well. So I really feel like he could push a potential 80 average in this role, and priced at, I think, 52 or something like that. At roughly 550k is definitely a worthwhile option. He's got that 20-25 points of upside for him, so I'm really bullish on what a Lindsay can do in our sides this year. The only concern I guess I have with him is that he wasn't getting involved in the switch plays as much as I wanted. Obviously, when I went back to those stats, he only had the 1 mark, whereas, you know, a guys like a Salem was up at 4, even a Jath was at 4. And really, there was just a lot of other marks around the place, but he just wasn't getting involved as much. Maybe being that a bit closer to the stoppage, wasn't having as much space to really get involved in those switch marks, which we probably want him to be able to do a little bit more often. But that's room for growth, in my opinion. I think that would be a nice bonus to have, but it's not a necessary thing for us to select him as. So I think he's definitely in seriously consideration to start on my side in my midfield as a cheaper option. The other main distributor that looks like to be taking a bit of a distributor type role using his runner in dash off halfback is CJ. I've spoken a little bit about him so far this preseason. And yeah, he just looked really, really good in this game. He's also doing a bit of intercepting, obviously using his quite vertical leap. He's able to take a few marks back there, so he just looked pretty good in this game. 15 touches, 4 marks, 1 tackle. Where I sort of fall over with this pick, though, is I definitely feel like he has upside in what his starting price is at 54, and I think he can push 70. But the consistency in the role is what concerns me, because it's shaky at best, because he butchered the ball a lot. I've seen this, you know, at Hawthorn. He does that a lot. His ball use is pretty shocking. So he's not really the one you want using the ball off halfback, because he's going to miss targets. It's going to be a turnover, and we saw that probably 3 or 4 times throughout this game across his 15 disposals, and that's just not a good enough hit rate to really drive you off halfback. So I could see him being changed or even dropped out of that side fairly quickly if it continued. He definitely need to increase his ball movement, and particularly with the way they want to play, they will need to have some pretty good ball users to really drive them to hit those marks and be able to get out the back and do what they really want to do to hit the scoreboard. I just don't know if I see Jath being that player that needs to use the ball. He's definitely going to provide that run and dash off halfback, but really needs to use his hands a bit more to hit those targets and make those chainage go. So I think I'm going to stay clear from this pick right now. But again, still keeping an eye on it. If he were to pop and start having some really good scores early season, then there's potential that we may just need to jump on, because he can really rack up the ball when he does get his way going. But that is it for Melbourne. We now will jump over to Richmond, which are obviously a lot less relevant names here, but the main one we need to talk about is obviously Sam Grill, or Samuel Grill, whichever one you would go with. He just looks like a lock for round 1 debut. He's got that little bit of spice to him. He's got definitely a decent scoring potential off halfback. You know, 39 points off just over a half is pretty impressive for a rookie, so he could potentially even push like a 70 back there with those 11 touches and 3 marks. And he showed plenty of confidence, taking the game on. He was running in between players, getting handball receives back and forth, and he's not afraid to run through a few tackles if need be. So I think we just lock him in our sides and lock him in on field at this stage, whether that's defense or midfield. Depends on what your structure is going to be like. I think we just lock him in at this stage, so don't need to elaborate too much more on that one. The other rookie was Sam Cumming, I believe. And unfortunately, he went down with a shoulder injury. pretty early on in this game. Only had the 12% time on ground. I don't know if it was. I think it was just after the delay for the Lightning, so don't read into that too much. But yeah, we saw him have 3 CBAs in before he got injured, so the role was looking pretty nice. That he was going to be there or thereabouts in terms of being an inside mid, but also a bit of halfback role. He did some nice things, set up a really nice goal while he was on the ground. So hopefully he is cleared of any injury. I haven't heard anything since this game, and it's been well over 24 hours now. So fingers crossed he can avoid any serious injury, and he still does play for round 1, because I still think he's a very viable option for us. But if there comes out that he's going to miss and he's going to have a long-term injury, then that's unfortunate. We won't be able to select him. So keep an eye on that news there. Lawler was the other one that we're looking at. Had the 15 touches and had the much more improved role with the number 1 CBA mid as he was all day. He had sort of 70% there. So that was really impressive to see that's sort of the bump he's going to get this year. Had the 10 disposals for a 26 points at halftime. So the scoring rate wasn't super impressive to me. Really just lacked a lot of that other, tackles and marks that you'd sort of want him to have to really bump up that average from that 54 price tag at this stage. So I'm not sure where I quite see it. He did sort of go off in the third quarter. If I show you the breakdown of that, he had 9 points in the first quarter, 17 points in the second. Then he was on 16 points already in the third quarter within 5 minutes with 5 quick touches in there. So he got up to that 42 fairly quickly in that third quarter, but just don't know if I see the scoring rate being massive. Maybe I could see it being a 70 average, but is that enough again from that 54? I'm not quite sure. I think there's quite a few other guys that I'm favouring at this stage. Philippou, Connor McDonald, obviously Flanders locks himself in. So I just think I'm going with those 3 over him at the moment. So I'm just not quite sure where I sit with him at this stage, just being a bit more of that impact. He did still rest forward, deep forward as well throughout this game. So I'm not quite sure where I sit with that one. So he's on the back burner for me at this stage. And then the final one I wanted to talk about for Richmond was Sam Banks. I was actually quite impressed with what I saw from his first outing for the year. Obviously, we haven't seen him at all in the preseason. Obviously, got rested in the last match simulation, so I was really keeping an eye on him. But it took majority of the kick-ins, obviously with the caveat that Vlostone did miss this game, so we've got to keep that in mind. But seemingly was ahead of Shaw in the pecking order for kick-ins, but Shaw obviously racked up in this game, having the highest score of 79, as he typically does in preseason. He's a hungry boy back there. They tried to get the handball received to whoever could kick it to, so yeah, he just really, when he took the kick-ins, he sort of kicked it to Jaden Short, he marked it, then he truly kind of crawled for the handball receive back, like a Kobe McCurch sort of does, running behind there. But sometimes they ignored him, so that wasn't the greatest sign at most times. He really spread quite well to get those +6s, but again, teammates ignored him. So it's just not great signs for what I think Sam Banks can be, plus the inclusion of Sam Grill back there. I do think Banks is going to struggle to push that 90 average that we sort of want him to go to as a starting selection, and that's only 11 points of upside at best. It is not the amazing pick that we once thought it could be at this stage. And again, don't look at the time on ground. That's just a bunch of baloney. I was watching the game. He was on the field again for 70 or 80% of the time. He just, again, was on the bench to start the first quarter, and that's when the delay happened. So don't read into the points per minute, because that will just really suck you in fairly quickly, because he would have had like 1.5% points per minute, which is just unheard of. So that is pretty much it for these 2 teams. Really not much more to take out of Richmond here, in my opinion. Like, their midfield mix is a bit shaky here and there. Still got guys like Ross, Taranto, Hopper as the main sort of guys. Layla's obviously come through there, but I'm not seeing too much more upside besides a lot of the rookies. And again, they're not going to be a super fantasy relevant team when it comes to scoring. They are going to get beaten up around the ball a fair bit, as they did in this game. Got beaten pretty comfortably. Should have been probably 10 goals by the end of the game. So be aware of that. But we will jump over to the next game. That is Hawthorn and the Doggies. A much less fantasy relevant game here with only a few names to talk about. But I feel like we should start with the man, the myth, and the legend in Tim English. Probably is the best starting point. Had that massive 133 score with, again, some lower time on ground. Definitely got rested towards that fourth quarter. A massive 23 disposals, 6 marks, 28 hitouts. He was just putting on a full show of what these new ruck rules are really going to help him to give him that freedom to jump in the stoppages. And again, really using that running power around the ground to beat out the ruckman to be that marking target down the line or in forward 50. And that resulted in him hitting the scoreboard as well. So really positive signs that Tim English is a viable option for us as a R1 selection, because again, there's potentially some upside there in what he can do. Again, 111 is pretty hard to go up from, so I feel like it will help him sort of stay stable in his price point, so definitely a viable option there. I guess a bit of an update on the ruck situation in terms of their overall stoppages. I think from the trend that I'm seeing, it seems like we've been a bit lied to in terms of the amount of stoppages decreasing. I haven't seen any evidence of that so far. Most games are still averaging well and truly inside that sort of 80 stoppages, which is about what we sort of saw last year around the 88 mark. So I don't think there's going to be as much of a slide now as things sort of progress, but is this a preseason thing? I don't know. These games are definitely pretty fierce and definitely didn't show signs of being just a preseason game warm up sort of thing. They definitely seem like they were more pretty real games. So I don't know if I see much of the stoppages changing from what we're seeing so far. So just trying to take that into account, I'm definitely toying up with the new information of, okay, if ruckman are definitely back on the menu, then okay, what are my structure going to look like with an English at an R1 or even another more pricey ruckman at R1, and how can I distribute my other players around the ground, around my starting team to account for these more expensive players in my team. So definitely something that you should be looking at. But Buderick was the next one I wanted to talk about as someone that we're looking at. Priced at that 48, it's hard to go past when he has had some pretty good solid outings in the last 2 matches, went back-to-back 80s with that 81 score in this game, with off 21 disposals, 6 marks, 2 tackles. Again, off halfback, did really, really well. And just looks like he has a bit of a license to use the ball and get involved in switch transitions. So that's really positive signs that he will definitely have a scope to improve on his average. But obviously we need to keep in mind that Dale was missing due to that little injury, but he sounds like he's going to be all good for opening round. So fingers crossed we do get a look at that in the opening round. Because we know how big of a market share Dale does have back there. And obviously that will potentially bring a few of these guys back there down back to where it becomes a bit more of a question mark. Whereas, a Buderick, we probably want him to go at least 70 to be a worthwhile pick, priced at that 48 to have that nice 20-point upside. But obviously 80 would be much better at that 30. But again, I think that's going to come down just that slight little bit with Bailey taking, not Bailey, Dale, Dale, being such of the market share back there, it may decrease him a fair bit. So definitely one I'm still heavily considering in my side, but again, want to have another look with opening round. The only other one I think I was particularly looking at was the rookie in Jax here. Had a slightly tougher day than what we saw in the match simulation, just with a few of the other premium guys back in this side. But he's still pretty impressive, 16 touches, 5 marks, definitely still got involved fairly consistently. If you look at his scoring distribution, it was pretty consistent all day. I should have mentioned that with Buderick as well, just definition of consistencies back there. So really showed you signs that there wasn't just a big jump up for any sort of particular reason. So I think he's really in a prime spot to be a rookie for us in round 1 or when we start selecting our team. But again, we'll come down to what happens in round 0, as a lot of these teams are going to be at this stage. But yeah, my gut feeling is we're going to end up with either one of Jacks or Buderick once Dale comes back, because maybe, the market share isn't going to be quite enough to defeat both of these guys to go at this level. But all we need from a Jacks is maybe a 50 to be a worthwhile option back there, with a lot of these other rookies dropping off at this stage, whether that's through injury or just poor scoring or maybe poor role than what we sort of expected. So keep all that in mind. Guys like Fraser really didn't impress me at all. Like, he had some CBA usage, but really nothing to note. Definitely none of this full-time mid that we sort of heard throughout the preseason, which I'd want him to have to really be a viable option. Like, let's be honest, Western Bulldogs sort of dominated all game in this matchup, and obviously scored accordingly. They're not going to have that every single week, and then the score's going to drop, and I can definitely see him dropping a few 50s and 60s at his price point. So I'm not going there. So I think we'll move over to Hawthorn now, where there's only 2 names that we want to really talk about. The first one being Connor McDonald. I think this only really reinforced my confidence with him as a selecting option. Even when the game wasn't going the Hawthorn's way, he was still definitely inside that midfield mix for majority of the day at that sort of 40%, which is what we sort of expected. Still scored an 86, which is well and truly over his price tag from the 22 disposals, 1 mark and 4 tackles. I will say that 1 mark is pretty unusual for him. Again, we saw he was quite a good spreader and was able to get a few marks in the match simulation, but really wasn't able to get involved in what was a pretty high marking game. 98 marks for the game is pretty high, but for him to only have 1 showed you that there really wasn't a lot of space when it came to the midfield mix. So I would expect that to definitely jump up when it comes to the real thing. So maybe this is enough to scare people off that maybe there's not enough upside, but for me, it only reinforced that I really want him on my side, and I think there's definitely 20 points of upside from his starting price tag. And again, even when things weren't going their way, he was in there and did what he needed to do. But again, we'll have to see what happens round 1. And the other thing was McKenzie got concussed in this game, so that only means his score may get boosted slightly in opening round due to the fact that he may even have stronger midfield minutes in there. With Ken McKenzie was expected to have 20-30% in there, so someone's gonna have to pick up the slack. Maybe that's maybe that's Connor McDonald. There's definitely other people that can run through there as well, but just keep an eye on what he is doing there. But yeah, I'm definitely hasn't left my side all preseason, and I don't see that changing based off what I saw in this game. But again, we'll see in opening round. And the final Hawk that we want to talk about was Josh Ward. I really feel like he has a lot of upside. He scored really well with a 97 from his 76 price tag. I definitely feel like he can go 85, 90 pretty conservatively. The question is, can he... is that enough as a starting selection as a pure midfielder? I'm not quite sure. I'm not confident just yet. But the concern for me here was he only had 30% CBAs, which is a much different role than what we sort of expected and wanted him to have. I've been really bullish in saying that he's going to be that second or third midfielder behind Newcomb, but things really weren't going Hawthorn's way in this game, and they were just throwing the magnets all over the field. What's his name? Weddle came through the midfield at a pretty decent tick for majority of the game. Then you had Nick Watson roll through there, Moore go through there. Nash obviously was in there a fair bit. So it was really just Newcomb was the main guy, and everyone else around him was just rotating. So it doesn't probably give me enough confidence to pick the likes of Josh Ward to go that sort of upside where he's already quite highly priced, whereas Connor McDonald is priced that little bit cheaper, and just being around the ball is going to be enough for him to get that extra bit that he needs to be able to push his name into that sort of top calculations as a midfielder. So yeah, I'm really bullish on Connor McDonald, but not Ward as much. So I don't think we read into this game too much, just with the way the midfield mix was sort of going. So that is it for that game. We'll move on to the final game we're talking about in this video, and that was St Kilda and Essendon. a really sort of scrappy really game in this one. Was a bit dewy in the first half, but did open up as the game went on. But firstly, we need to talk about the man of the hour, and that is Nasai. He is just unbelievable how good he's going to be, and he's going to be really enjoying and really entertaining to watch over the next this season. It just looks amazing, dangerous wherever he goes, and the game plan for St Kilda just looks super simple. Just get it to Nasai and let him do his thing. Led the way in CBAs. So definitely looks like he's set for a full-time midfield role with a bit of full forward where he looks super dangerous up there. We did see him rest up there rather than coming to the bench and resting. He was in the forward line, being that deep forward, being able to take speckies and do a really big lead. And we saw as a result he got 4 goals as well. So that's really going to help him to really mitigate that starting price point of 111, because a lot of the concern came with the side was the high starting price, and he's not going to get those massive disposals that we're used to seeing him. I don't see him getting 35, 40 disposals like we saw him when he was getting off halfback. He's going to get a lot more meaningful touches, and he's going to need to hit the scoreboard to get those big scores like we sort of saw. Again, because he's not a huge tackler, so he's not going to get those tackle numbers, and he's not going to have the freedom to get a lot of marks around the ground, especially when he's got, a man potentially hanging off him, and the tags are going to come. There was no tag in this game, but the tags will come is one of the biggest flags when I'm looking at Nasaya. But it is obviously super scary that he can go this big, and it's going to be super scary not starting him if he does put up a massive score in opening round against Collingwood. So definitely going to be aware of that. So, but even when you think of other players that can potentially do the same thing that Nasaya is doing right now, where they drift sort of half forward to take some good marks and kick goals, is a pure inside midfielder, but can also drop back, take some kick-ins and get involved back there. I think of a guy like Jordan Dawson. He's a pronounced guy that has been able to do that in the past and still average quite well, so there is some confidence around that. Nick Dacos is similar in the sense that he is damaging in all lines, but doesn't quite have the height advantage that Nasai does, so he can't really be as damaging up forward, so he doesn't hit the scoreboard as often as a full forward, whereas Nasai, again, is very damaging up there, has a great leap, has a strong leading ability, so I feel like he is going to be a good selecting pick, but I don't think I see upside in what he's going to start at. I do feel like there's going to be some floor scores there for him with some tags coming up. So that's enough about him, I think. We'll move on to his ex-defensive buddy in Sinclair, who was just phenomenal in this game, racked up at will 149 fantasy points, which is just unreal. With off that 39 disposals, 10 marks, 2 tackles as well. Just was everywhere in this game. But St Kilda really just showed they're happy to possess the ball at will, chip it around and find a better way forward. They really weren't moving towards this faster ball movement. Again, they really won that slow the game down, possess the ball, chip your way through the game, and you can see that with 99 marks, and a lot of that was in the halfback with guys like Sinclair, Windhager, who we'll talk about in a minute. Flanders was floating back there a fair bit. Then you had the guys like Carroll, who had that halfback role, and then whatnot. So there's a lot of marks in that halfback role at this stage. So that's definitely something to be aware of. And this usually leads to a lot of fantasy-friendly scoring in these teams. So St Kilda's definitely going to be up there again for us this year. So the next point is really, what is the question mark around Sinclair? Can he have some upside from his 101 price tag to start the season? And I struggle to have a little bit of confidence based off this game, just due to the fact that it was quite open. It was against Essendon, who quite frankly just got beaten fairly heavily. You can see that just in the fantasy points, just 1,700 points is pretty massive. So I just don't know if I don't know if I have confidence in Sinclair going to that next level to become a bona fide top 3, top 4 sort of defender. He's sort of already in the top 6, don't get me wrong, he's definitely there. But I don't know if I see him going that next level. But if you're worried to say instead of going a Whitfield or a Rosie who are priced at 5 or 6 points ahead of Sinclair, and maybe you don't have much confidence that they can go to that next level, then I definitely can see a world where you're going with a Sinclair instead, because he's priced at a little bit cheaper with a few question marks around, okay, yes, Nasai is moving out of that back line, and that should free up some spots for Sinclair to, take more kick-ins, but you also got to take into account Windhager's now gone back there to look like he's going to be a main distributor, which I guess we'll start talking about him a little bit now, is he looks like he's going to be that next partner to take a lot of that accountability off halfback and really look like he got a license to use the ball and demand it across halfback as well. And they're really giving it to each other at every single possibility. So they got plenty of marks together. You can see that with Windhager, 41 disposals. He was just absolutely everywhere in this game. So I just don't know if I see the upside with Sinclair to go to that next level when he's already got someone coming alongside him who has shown potential to be a very similar sort of demanding back there for points as Nasai Wanganamilera was back there. So again, probably not super bullish on Sinclair at this stage, but talking more about Windhager, he really surprised me in the fact that he was taking some kick-ins, which I didn't sort of expect coming into the preseason. So it really, really doubles down that he looks like he's set for a real halfback role, take kick-ins. He even got some CBA action in the second half, which is probably where we don't really want him to go because previously he hasn't scored amazingly in there, but it really didn't slow his scoring rate that much when it came to that. It was more so in the fourth quarter than in the third, but still had 24 points in the fourth quarter, so definitely didn't slow his scoring rate too much. But yeah, he's going to have that pretty nice hybrid role of halfback and maybe some inside mid-time if need be. It really was just due to the fact that they were resting some of the other guys like a Finn McRae. Sorry, not Finn McRae. A Jack McRae and a Garcia really just had very minimal game time in the third and fourth quarter. So they needed another midfielder in there to do some of that work. So definitely a very big surprising one, and I think a lot of people will be pretty hyped to jump on him at that starting price. It is 82, so it is a bit more expensive, but pretty much guaranteed he's going to get defender status in round 6, and he potentially could put his name in calculations to be a top 6 defender for us if he goes well. Think of an Ash last year. I think I'm making a very similar comparison with those two, being priced at very similar starting points last year. Obviously, Windhager's a midfielder selection rather than being a backman, but both have the opening round bye, so we're going to have a look at him. And I feel like a lot of people could jump on him if he does go big. And yeah, then you've got that tricky decision. Okay, do you jump off him in round 4 when he has the bye, or do you hold him through, hoping he's going to become a decent defender for us over the period? So definitely something that I'm weighing up a little bit now. Probably wasn't someone I was hugely considering prior to the game because I wasn't 100% sure what his role was going to be. I personally thought he'd be more in the midfield because to me it looks like their midfield needs that bigger body to do the defensive work. They didn't really need that in this game. You can see the tackle numbers were fairly low for the game. There wasn't much pressure when it comes to the Essendon midfield. They really got smashed in there quite comfortably. So I thought he'd be in there, but that obviously isn't the case. So is it worth starting him at 82 as a mid only? Is definitely an interesting discussion point that we'll have to talk about before we hit the opening round. Before we hit round 1. But the next one, we'll move on a little bit. We'll move on to Flanders. I don't think we needed to see much more from him. He did everything we expected, plus more. Didn't quite have the highest score today, but yeah, at his starting point, you're just picking him. So that's enough on him. Filippo was the other one that we're highly looking at. Again, had the role, looked really good, and got plenty of touches. Just really lacked a lot of that extra stuff, the marks and tackles to really bump up his score to be just lock himself in. He still had the 76, which is 20 points over what he's priced at. So I don't think it's enough to worry me off of him. But I do feel like some of the community may overreact and be like, no, jumping off him, he doesn't have the scoring potential, even with the role. But he showed he got his hands on the ball plenty. Was the highest midfielder to get his hands on the ball at 29 disposals. So he just needs to add a few of those extra marks and tackles to bump up his score that bit further. And I think he can easily push an 80 average in at where he's priced at. So still really bullish on picking him in my forward line, as I said. I think the only other one that I had was for St Kilda was Carroll as that sort of cheaper rookie that we're looking at, who we expect to have a halfback role, and that definitely was confirmed in this game. He's definitely off halfback and got involved in some transition ball and switches. So had the 17 touches for 6 marks, 4 of 59, priced at this 32. I think he is definitely one that we need to have in our calculations as a starting rookie. Maybe not on field, but definitely on our bench at this stage, an elevated price tag. And again, a lot of the other rookies that we're going to talk about throughout these games are definitely falling away at the moment with pretty poor scores. So he's definitely high up in my calculations and is in my team currently. From there, the only thing I think I wanted to mention is that he did have a poorer first half, which isn't great. He definitely came a bit more alive in the third and fourth. So that is a bit of a flag to put on it, that when the game was sort of at its best, when the game was sort of at its fullest, where most of the players are playing, he wasn't really getting the scoring there done. But in saying that, the conditions didn't really help him in that way, that it was a bit more dewy, it was a bit more contested, and the ball wasn't really floating around halfback nearly as much. And you can even see that with Sinclair and Windhager. They didn't really have the massive scores that they had in the third and fourth quarter, when it really opened up and really came to that bit more of a possession game that St Kilda really want to play. So I think I wouldn't be too worried about his first half scoring there. But we'll move on to Essendon and finish off the video. I've already been talking for way too long and my voice is already going. But a few players to talk about here. Just a reminder before we talk about them, this is the final look of these players. Again, they do not have the game in opening round, so this is the final look for the preseason. So we'll start with Parrish. He was obviously the most popular player coming into this game. Again, had the role that we sort of wanted him to have, expected to be a full-time mid. He had the 70% 70% CBAs, and then it was sort of Caldwell, Durham at sort of 60%, and then followed by Roberts, who was still in there at a fair click, which again still surprised me. So still coming to terms with him as a inside mid, another cook in the kitchen, you can say. So we got to take that into account. Does that cap a few of these inside mid guys' ceiling with a natural sort of guy that gets the ball a fair bit? Obviously, Roberts was the highest scorer in this game, so definitely something that we need to consider. But in terms of Parrish, definitely had the role. Didn't score amazingly. Obviously, had the 70 off 21 disposals, didn't get any marks, and had the 3 tackles. So I think this really comes down to that Essendon were just badly beaten in the midfield, quite comfortably. They got demolished when it came to the centre bounces. I think they lost it like 18-9 clearances, so they just really couldn't get their hands on the ball, which we know Parrish is sort of at his best when he's in there doing the contested stuff, doing the stoppage work. He's not really one to get much of the ball when it comes to transition or outside around the ground. So we realistically needed him to have a bit more of a stoppage game to do a lot of that work. So I don't think it's enough to scare me off just based off the score, because I don't want to read into the scores too much. It is, again, just practice matches, but it seemed like a pretty good hit out, in my opinion, to calculate it off of. So I can see why some people have jumped off of him due to this game, but I don't think he's left my side at this stage. I'll have to look at who else is in contention for that spot. There are definitely a few others that need to sort of slot in there at this stage. But yeah, I think Parrish is still a worthwhile option that we need to seriously consider in our teams. Priced at where he's at, I think he can definitely still push closer to that 90, which we sort of want him to do. But the next one is Caldwell, who I have been hot on most of this preseason. Is okay. He had an okay game. I wouldn't say he was phenomenal. Didn't, again, scream that I need to pick him like I sort of wanted him to, but I'm starting to have a lot less confidence in this pick just due to the Parrish being back in there, and obviously is going to demand a fair bit of the ball. Now, Roberts being added to the equation is another big flag that I didn't really consider early days, just because I didn't know who was going to be part of that midfield mix. But it just feels to me that it's starting to come too many cooks in the kitchen to really see one of these guys push into that 110 sort of category. So when you consider Caldwell's already at that 104 price tag, I think it's enough to scare me away to not start him, because again, I don't think he's going to be able to push that 110 average with so many other guys in there that are going to demand a lot of the peel. And with what I could see in this game, Roberts was getting a lot of that inside mid work and stealing a lot of his possessions, whereas Caldwell was just doing a lot of the tackle work and being that defensive midfielder, not really getting a lot of the ball. So I think there's some concerns there for me for Caldwell, and I think it's enough to push me away, look elsewhere, when we have a lot of other guys that we are pretty keen on that same sort of price point at this stage. His other teammate in Zach Merritt, I think the downfall is finally upon us this year. He was just nowhere near the midfield nearly as much as what we sort of need him to be and what we have seen from him in the past decade. He was only in there about 30%, so he was playing all over the ground, deep forward, halfback, mid, wing. He was just everywhere. So I really don't think that's going to be fantasy friendly for us. And I think we can thoroughly just cross him off our watch list as a starting option. At this point in time, we'll have to see how it sort of develops throughout the season, whether he picks up forward status or defense status, and maybe he can push into those lines. But unless he has a settled role, I don't think I'll be looking at him at all this season, unfortunately. And that's really disappointing to say, because he's been such a good fantasy player for us for a long time. But moving on to the cheaper guys, Blackston was phenomenal in this game and really thoroughly impressed me, particularly in that first quarter. If I go to show you his scoring distribution, had the 41 points in the first quarter, where he was just absolutely everywhere. I think he had 6 touches, like 4 tackles, plenty of hit outs, and took a few marks as well. So yeah, just looked really good and really showed his capacity to score, which I wasn't super sure what it was going to be like. I maybe thought 60 was maybe where he would sort of lean, but maybe I'm starting to lean towards maybe he can push a 70 pretty comfortably, because he showed he has a bit of athleticism to him. He can jump, he can get around the ground pretty comfortably. He is a pretty good tackling pressure man as well, so he's going to get those tackles, which was really impressive. And even up against TDK and Marshall, who are pretty good ruckmen themselves, he definitely held his own, had the 21 hitouts for the day, and it definitely had a pretty good tank to him with 81% time on ground. So everything's just a massive tick for him at this stage. I think we need to start him in our defensive lines at this stage at that 400k. So yeah, definitely just think he picks himself for us in our team. So definitely lock him in. He is still very lowly owned at this stage, and maybe even hold his spot longer in that side, even when Nick Bryan comes back, because he does look quite good in there at this stage. But the final two we will talk about in this video was the 2 draftees, and that being Dyson Sharp and Jacob Farrow, I think his name is. Both particularly weren't great. You know, Dyson Sharp's probably the better of the two with the 50 fantasy points off the 15 disposals, 4 marks. Didn't get any inside mid time in this game, but was involved in a lot of stoppages, pushing from half forward into the stoppages, so he did get involved there to get a few touches. Whereas Jacob Farrell was just purely off halfback, didn't really get involved too much in any transitional play. Did have the 11 disposals, but again, really had nothing else really going for him. So there are concerns for him at this stage. I only had 52% time on ground, which is a bit of a worry. If we look at his distribution of points, it really showed you that he was really rested in the fourth quarter. Didn't really see much of it at all, and just really had no scoring to him at all. So there are concerns for me there, particularly at his elevated price point of like 300k. So we'll have to see. It's a tough one, because if I had to pick right now, if I had to start him or not, I'd probably lean towards not starting him just due to that fact. But we'll have to see what else falls our way in terms of other rookies around the other teams. Is there a spot for him in our teams? and we just need to lock him away, sort of thing. So definitely stocks down on him at this stage, but definitely want to keep an eye on other rookies to determine if he's going to be in our sides or not. Or we could go a cheaper option around the ground. So that is it for today's video. That was all those 3 games. Hopefully you got a bit of information out of these 3. Definitely some very important games that we need to consider, particularly for Melbourne, Richmond, and Essendon. The other 3 we will have another look at next weekend. But yeah, definitely some guys that we're locking in. Flanders, Philippa, in my opinion. I think Carroll was on the bench. For Essendon, definitely Blackstone we can lock in. Parrish is still a question mark. I think he'll still be there. I don't know if we can pick Sharp just yet, because the one thing I didn't mention was Gresham didn't play due to some reason. I didn't actually say what he's out for, whether it was resting or he's injured, but he sort of normally fills that half forward role, so definitely something to keep in mind when it comes to round 1 if Gresham is named, and then maybe Darcy Sharp doesn't quite get the role that we sort of expect him to, so keep that in mind. But for Hawthorn, I think we're locking in Connor McDonald. For Bulldogs, you can lock in top English if you're wanting to go there, but really there was no one else, maybe besides a Jacks and a Buderick, if we see the right things when it comes to opening round. Then for Melbourne, let's going back to them real quick. I really liked the looks of Caleb Windsor, so he's definitely heavily in consideration. Lindsay as well in my books at a very unique option. And for Richmond, it's just Grill, I think, is the only option that we can pretty much lock in at this stage. So probably 6 or 7 names that are added into our team pretty comfortably. So definitely a worthwhile look into these players as much as we can. So again, please leave a like, subscribe, do all those great things. Hopefully you've enjoyed, and I will see you for part 3, where we will be going through the final 3 games tomorrow night. All the best, guys. Take it easy, and I will see you next time. Cheers.